Welcome to A Stranger, a Suitcase and a Story. I'm Anton van der Walt. This is a podcast about starting over. It is about what it takes to leave the familiar behind and the courage it takes to begin again in a land that isn't yet home. Together with my co-host Ben Liebenberg, we explore the untold stories of migration. Not just where people went, but why they left, what they held on to, and what they've had to let go. Each episode, we sit down with someone who's made that leap. Someone who's left behind not just places, but languages, careers, communities, and sometimes even parts of themselves. They share what called them forward, what nearly held them back, and what they've come to understand about identity, belonging, and starting again. Produced in partnership with Southern Crossings, a community for South Africans forging new lives in Australia, this podcast is a place to feel seen, heard, and understood. Because this isn't just about visas or paperwork. It's about identity, loss, hope, and the quiet strength it takes to rebuild a life piece by piece. So wherever you are on your journey, arriving, settling, or still thinking about it, welcome. This is where stories connect us all.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This information to customers travelling on the Land Airways flight LA 800 approaching Qantas 321 service to Auckland and Santiago.
You are listening to episode 29 of A Stranger, a Suitcase and a Story. And with me is my co-host Ben. Ben, are you ready for a fantastic story today?
Yeah, looking forward to it, listening to some Durban stories.
That's right. So let me just immediately start to introduce our guest. So today our guest is Sanushka Seomangal. So Sanushka's story begins in Durban, on the north coast, in a big, vibrant, deeply connected family. The kind of upbringing where life is shared across cousins, gatherings, food, noise, and a constant sense of you've never really on your own. Her move to Australia wasn't part of a long-held plan. In fact, it started almost casually. As a law student, she and her sister visited University of Queensland. This is such a great story. Filled out an application form for a master's degree for fun and were accepted. What followed wasn't a clean break. It was a series of movements to Australia, back to South Africa, and then back again to Australia, shaped by opportunity, but also by realities of life back home. And in those early years, what was most striking wasn't the opportunity, it was the absence. No family, no built-in community, and no village. And so what does Sanushka do? They build one. They build one here. So what Sanushka carried with her was more than memory. It was a way of living, a belief that you find joy in every moment, even the hard ones. And that a home isn't a place, it's something you create through people. So over time, Sydney became that place. And today, Sanushka is not just settled, she's a force. A partner in one of Australia's leading law firms, a leader across multiple national and international platforms, and someone shaping conversations in law, policy, and community, from Australia-India relations through to advancing diversity and leadership in the profession. This is a story about building a life you never planned for and then stepping fully into it. So, welcome, Sanushka. It's quite interesting to listen to an introduction like that, isn't it?
Oh, it's very humbling. Thank you, Anton and Ben. I'm very, very humbled by that very generous introduction.
No, it's fantastic to have you as a guest. We're really keen to talk you through some things. So, when you listen to that introduction, because that's all of you. We've just taken it and put a few bows around it, right? And make it work. So when you listen to that introduction, what's the one thing that strikes you about what you're hearing?
Oh, it's been a long journey, but it's been a fruitful one, I think, and it's just been one of accident rather than design. I think is what come through to me.
Yeah. No, that's probably a good take in the start, right at the start, that it is a journey, it's not a destination. And yeah, sometimes we see it that we have to get somewhere, but some we just have to enjoy the journey, getting there.
Yeah, we're going to go, take you back a little bit to Durban all those years back. I mean, Ben knows Durban well. He lived there for a while. I lived there for a while myself. So, we were all part of the Sharks. In fact, Ben was a Shark, by the way. So, before I get there, Sanushka, what we do in our episodes, we have a suitcase moment, and that's a suitcase moment where we try and connect you or the person that's on the podcast to some either historical event or something important between you and Australia, or if it's possible between South Africa and Australia. But in this instance, I think this suitcase moment might make much more sense to you. So I want to talk a little bit about from an empire to a dialogue. And so for much of the early history, Australia and India were not connected directly at all. They were both part of the British Empire, linked not by relationship but by administration. So decisions flowed through London, not between the countries themselves. When India gained independence in 1947, that dynamic shifted, but the relationship between the two countries remained relatively limited in strategic focus for decades. And so the real change came much later. In 1992, Australia established the Australia-India Council to strengthen bilateral ties and to advise government, marking a more deliberate effort to build that relationship. And over time, that effort expanded beyond government. Initiatives like the Australia-India Youth Dialogue, launched in 2011, were designed to connect emerging leaders across both countries, recognizing that long-term relationships aren't built on meetings, but between people. So the connection evolved from the empire to independence to something far more intentional, a relationship built not just by governments, but by individuals stepping into it. And Sanushka, we read a little bit of your bio, and you are very much involved in that, right?
Yes, I was. I was one of the founders of the Australian Youth Dialogue, and I spent 5 years on the board of the Australian Youth Council before it was decommissioned and replaced by the Centre for Australian-India Relations.
Yes.
So yes, yeah, very much involved. But again, like most of my journey, was not quite intentional. Something I fell into, and found myself in a position where I had opportunities that were presented to me, but also because of circumstance, I felt like there was a need to do something, because there wasn't a solution, an obvious solution, and I thought I could be part of that solution.
So tell us a bit more about the circumstance. Why would you get involved with something like that?
So I guess for me, when I started practicing as a lawyer in Sydney, there were not many people looked like me that were doing what I was doing. And there certainly weren't many people, or any people really, that looked like me that were in leadership positions from a private practice perspective. And so as a junior lawyer, thinking about what a pathway to partnership might look like would involve having a practice. And having a practice means having contacts, relationships, and networks, which you don't have, certainly as a migrant, and certainly starting off as a junior lawyer. And so I was very fortunate because my supervising partner, who's a mentor, one of my champions, one of the kindest men I've ever had the pleasure of working with, Paul Stevenson, he sat me down and he said, well, if you're looking at this quite seriously, then we need to think about how we help you to build this network, how we help you to build these relationships. And he explained to me that in his career, he was an outsider. And he showed me how he used the unique things about him to build those relationships. And he said, well, in your case, you are South African, but you're of Indian origin, because my great-grandparents were from India. Great-grandparents. So I'm third generation South African. And so he said, let's try to look at those things that make you unique and see if we can explore how you could build relationships in those parts of your identity.
That's very
And
smart. That's very smart.
yeah, which was very like I hadn't thought of it, but it was something he kind of directed me into. And so I explored the South Africa Connect, but there wasn't too much that I was able to access at that point. Now I'm not going to share my age if I tell you how long ago that was. but back then there certainly wasn't as much. But the Australian Business Council was quite established. But what it didn't have was a young presence. So it didn't have a young professionals connect. And so I kind of fell into this position with a bunch of other like-minded people where we established the young professionals kind of angle in Australian-India business relations. And then about that time, the Australian-India relationship itself kind of hit a roadblock because of what happened around the treatment of international students, particularly international students from India, largely in Victoria, but there were some isolated incidents in New South Wales. And there was a media uproar, largely on the Indian side, and relations got quite tense. And a few of us that were involved in the Business Council, or the young professionals, we thought that the responses of the governments on both sides weren't quite adequate to address what was happening on the ground.
Sorry, can I
And as
interrupt just quickly? So just for people that obviously haven't lived through it like you have and got the background, so what was actually the issues? What were the issues involved?
there were incidents of violence, and students were being attacked on public transport in Victoria. There were a number of incidents, and there were some isolated incidents in New South Wales, and there were racist attacks primarily against international students. But what happened was it just became a big media uproar, and people started to take political positions. And I was traveling to India at that time as part of like business delegations through my role at the Business Council. And I remember being in India, people asking me, if I was being attacked or saying things like Australians are racist. And I was in a position where I was like, hang on, that's not quite what's happening on the ground. A lot of this is media spin. Yes, things are happening, but it's not, occurring at the extent that the media seems to be leading me to believe. And I was not the only one. There were a bunch of us that were having similar experiences, and we came together and thought about how we could find a solution. And the solution that we came up with was that young people weren't being asked for our opinion in that entire situation. And so we set up the Australia-India Youth Dialogue to effectively bring young leaders from both countries together to dialogue about issues facing the relationship. So a bunch of us young people at the time, we just thought that the response was just not adequate for the circumstances that we were finding ourselves in, and particularly because of the misconceptions that we thought and the misunderstandings that people were beginning to have about Australians as a whole or Indians as a whole, and it just didn't bode well for the way things would flow from there. And so we got together and we set up the Australian Youth Dialogue, which is basically a second-tier diplomatic program that brings together young leaders from Australia and India each year to talk about issues of significance to the relationship, and come up with recommendations as to how that relationship could be bettered. Incredible. In the first year, we went to India and we met in two cities, Mumbai and Delhi, and we spoke about the issues that we were facing at the time, including what was happening around the students and education. It was not long after as well the terrorist event in Mumbai, so international security was something we discussed, and it was just an amazing experience. And since then, that organization has grown from strength to strength. It's, I think, almost 15 years old now. It's got an incredible cohort of leaders who we started out as young leaders and now we
Is this thing? Do you have a government connection as well, local in government as well, in terms of you you know you can speak to each other, but there are obviously recommendations that you want to make, and
sure.
then somebody's got to.
Yeah, so we put together white papers that we take to government. We get invited to dialogue at government level. We're supported by governments on both sides, but for all intents, it's an independent organization, bipartisan, not political. The whole point of it is to come up with solutions to try to improve the relationship.
And how many students were there
Well, not really students.
in
So,
those
so it's
students?
it's emerging leaders, right? And so it's effectively people who are the cusp of, greater leadership, or already young leaders in their own rights. And we've had as part of our cohorts, people who've gone on to government. The former shadow, assistant foreign minister, sorry, was one of our cohort. We've had, business leaders, politicians, actors.
But what was so? How many Indian students were here at the time?
Oh, in there were, I don't know the number, but they were, at that stage where I understood to be thousands.
So just not to belabor the point, but isn't Indian the biggest group of people that from any nation in Australia from a migration point of view, or am I ever got that wrong?
They are one of the largest from a migration in recent migration. Yes, the largest number of migrants.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was incredible. We set up that organization 2011, 2012. I stepped down because I wasn't young enough anymore to be, to be a young leader. And we handed that organization over to a new leadership team, and they've just gone on from strength to strength.
That's good. All right, so that's a really good link to your suitcase story, but we'd like to go back a little bit earlier and find out a little bit about Durban and your family in Durban. You obviously, as Anton introduced you, from a big family, third generation. Tell us a little bit about your family and your upbringing in Durban.
Sure. Just the sound of the word Durban is enough to make me smile. Durban is home. Yes, you're quite right. I was born in Durban, and I grew up in a suburb called La Mercy, which is on the north coast of Durban, just north of Umhlanga and Umhloti. And it's beautiful. It's paradise. And I was very fortunate. I come from a very, very large family. My dad is one of 12, and my mom is one of 10. And I have, almost, I think, 100 first cousins. And yes, I know them all. And so growing up in a very large family and a large extended family, you pretty much had your own community. And so, my memories of growing up in Durban, just family and people and just a constant village and revolving door, people and functions and weddings and birthdays and, funerals, because life's like that. But it's just, even in that, you're just surrounded by this cocoon of love. I think also I'm a little bit spoiled because on both sides of my extended family, my siblings and I are among the youngest, and therefore we were, I think, a lot more doted on and a lot more spoiled because of that. So I had a very privileged upbringing in Durban, and it's, some of my best memories of growing up in Durban.
So what were the things that you liked doing as a young school there, and what excited you?
Sure. So I was a bit of a nerd even back then. So I was always the reader. And my parents now tell my nieces and nephew exactly the same thing, that I was always the little girl who would be reading no matter where it was. And so I loved that. I loved reading. I grew up surrounded by books. I was very lucky because my mom's sister, who had a big hand in raising us. So my parents were quite busy growing up. My mom was a lawyer in Durban, and she was quite remarkable because she was among quite very few female lawyers of Indian origin at that time. So it was like well and truly like apartheid proper. And so she was.
So you came and did the same in Australia then. That's what you're saying. Let's just
Slightly
make that
different,
connection.
slightly.
So
I think her challenges were a little bit greater.
all right, let's go back.
But yeah, so she was quite busy, and my dad was quite busy supporting her, and like with his own business interest. And so when I was about 12, I'm going to say, my mum's sister moved in with us. And that was wonderful because she was a teacher, and it was just, there was a softness about her in the way that she taught. And so I just loved learning. And so that was really lovely. We spent a lot of time as kids, the three of us. So I have a younger sister, a younger brother, but the three of us being a unit. So we were always very much together. Three of us are born in a period of 4 years, so we're quite close in age. And so we were just this unit, and we spent a lot of time together. So we would play together a lot. We weren't allowed outside of the house. So we would do a lot of damage inside. And my parents were very liberal about that, because they pretty much allowed us to do whatever we wanted to do as long as we didn't leave the house. So I remember.
Was that for safety reasons?
For safety reasons. For safety reasons. So I do remember breaking a number of windows. I was present at the window breaking. I was not responsible for that.
So Sanushka, who did the cooking in the house? Because that's in the Indian tradition, that's a big deal.
So a mix, both my mom and my dad. And then when my aunt moved in to stay with us, she did. When we were very young, we had nannies, and they would do some of the cooking, but primarily in terms of like dinner and stuff like that, it would be my mom or my dad. My dad is actually a better cook than my mom.
and did they teach you? Did they teach you?
Yes,
as well?
yeah, very much. It's very much part of the training. So I think it's very rare to come across somebody who's, South African of Indian origin who's not able to cook.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. So and I'm sure. Or let me ask you this before I go to Australia, because that's just where I want to go, and I don't want to go there yet. So you were part of this extended family, and of course, then we insert the South African thing in, don't go outside the house and all of that sort of stuff, which is such a pity, really, because it's such a beautiful area. But let's not go there necessarily now. But I mean, you then went to school there, and did you go to uni in Durban?
Yes, I did. I went to school and I went to university. My first law degree is a South African one. It's from the University of Natal. And then we came to Australia after that.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that, I mean, you talk about your family, the extended family, 100 cousins. It must be quite something. I mean, I can't imagine that, right? I mean, I can't imagine going in that, going into having a family, because, we were 4 siblings, and then, and that never went well in the Christmas, and it was just 4, right? And so there's always drama somewhere, but.
I think drama is part and parcel, but I think it's, that's to be expected. But I think it's just more, even now. So we went to South Africa last Easter, and for the first time we took my nieces and my nephew's been a few times, but my nieces, it was their first trip to South Africa to meet extended family. And it was incredible because we didn't know how they would deal, because they've only really had our unit. And we get to, in King Shaka Airport in Durban, and we walk out, and there's signs, like they printed out signs with their names on it, and there's like 40 people waiting there for them, and they just like loved it. They loved all the attention. They lapped it up. We went on safari for a weekend, and I think there were 40 of us that went on safari because some of my cousins wanted to experience like the kids' first experience of seeing animals. They wanted to be there for it. Like they just lapped it up, and they worked out who was who, and they were just very comfortable with it. And I think it's just a very normal thing. Like there's just this, I don't know how to express it properly, but it's just like this, like the security in knowing that you are just loved. Like you were adored, doted on. And they came back really confident, I think, after that experience. And we realized that was pretty much our experience growing up. And so it's just lovely that they were able to have that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. No, that is wonderful. And then, growing up in South Africa, I can't leave this. So behind you is a quote from Nelson Mandela. I think I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What does that say?
That one says, "It always seems impossible until it's done."
So why do you have that?
That was a gift from a secretary of mine back in the day as I was progressing up towards partnership, and she just thought it was an important reminder for me.
So yeah, that's I think that's a
Yeah, and I'm not sure you can see it, but just behind me on the other side is actually in a large frame is the quote from Nelson Mandela's trial. And so I have that on in my office. So I'm very, very proudly South African.
Well, I mean, talking about connections, right? And so, you talk about Nelson Mandela's trial. About a year ago, we had a guest on the podcast, Mark Stamridge, whose mother's family, her cousin, I think it was Bram Fischer, who defended Nelson Mandela at the trial. So, it's a small world.
Oh, incredible. Incredible.
Yeah. So, yeah. So the question then for me is you go to school and then you go to uni, but you go study law. I know your mother did it.
I think it's such a funny thing. I articulated that I wanted to be a lawyer since I could talk. I knew I wanted to be a corporate lawyer, I think when I was about 12. I pretty much grew up under my mom's desk. And I think, the universe had no other option for me because I think she went into labor with me during her board exam. And so there was no other option.
So you were born a lawyer.
I was pretty much like, there was no other option. But but for me, I think I was more interested in the corporate side of law and like the deal making and building and the transactional side, because even when I was quite young, I was quite aware of it. And so the only other job I was interested in was Secretary General of the UN, but I didn't quite have the right qualifications at that time.
But I would think it's also a lot to do with justice and fairness, right? Because look at the work that you've eventually done in Australia, right? I mean, you pick up a cause that's worth picking up.
Yeah, I think that's bred in your bones, though, as a South African.
Let's fast forward to you finishing your studies at University of Natal, and then you and your sister come to Australia. Was that a holiday, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so we were in Queensland on a holiday, and as you do as law students, we went to check out the law school at the University of Queensland because it's a beautiful law school. And while we were there, we saw these paper forms to fill out as applications, and we thought, oh, this will be funny. So we just filled out these application forms to do a master's degree, and we chucked them in the box and went off on our merry way. And a couple of days before we flew back to Durban, we got a call from the University of Queensland, and they called to let us know that they'd accepted our applications to do a master's. And we said, oh, that's lovely, thank you. And off we went back home, and said to my parents that we had a wonderful time, but, funny story. This is what happened. And they asked us if it was something we wanted to do. Because I said, at that stage, things weren't looking great in South Africa in terms of opportunities. And so they said if this is something we were interested in doing, they'd be happy to support us to do that. And so we did. So the next year, my sister and I came back to Queensland, and we did a master's in applied law. We had the wherewithal, I think, as part of that process to just assess our South African qualifications, just to see, what the differences were. And so we included as part of our master's degree in Queensland the 4 courses that we needed to have our South African qualifications recognised by Australian standard. And so we did a master's, and it was wonderful. It was like being in the movies. Like campus life was so fun in Australia. And as we got to the end of our degree, our student advisor said to us, did you know, because you're going to have a postgraduate qualification from Australia, you will be eligible to apply to be a permanent resident. And we said, well, that's nice. Thank you. And so I called my parents again, and we said, well, this is what the university is saying. And they said, well, if that's what they're saying, maybe just put in the forms. And so we did. And, a few months later, we had our degrees conferred on us. And then, not long after that, we got our permanent resident visas granted. And then we went back home. And
How long was that master's?
was a 1-year master's, yeah.
Okay, so that whole process took you till the end of the year, and then you just went.
We just went back home, and we were there for a couple of months, and then our visas were granted, and we had a break-in at home, and we had a couple of other incidents, and my sister and I were young women, finding our independence, wanting to drive around everywhere. My parents were not very comfortable with that. And so they thought it seemed like a good idea for us to go back to Australia to see if we could make a go of it, because we had these visas that allowed us to do that. And so we did. So we came to Sydney, and we tried to find work as lawyers, and we learned very quickly that we weren't the kind of lawyers that Sydney was looking for. And that was very humbling and very disappointing, and, quite demoralizing. We're 2 young, people who thought that, we had 2 very good law degrees, and assumed we'd therefore be quite employable. But we learned very quickly by all the rejection letters we received that we were not. And so,
why were you not employable then at the time?
The thing is, the Sydney legal market is quite an insular market, private practice in particular at that point in time. And we were, for all intents, international students. And it's quite difficult to enter private practice, or was certainly at that time, as an international, effectively coming through as an international student. And so we tried to make a go of it. We did other things. So I was a legal editor at Thomson Reuters for like a year, and that was quite useful because it taught me and my sister the same thing. It taught us it taught us how to understand the legal system in the different courts, and because what we were doing was summarizing judgments that were coming out of the different courts. So we got to know who the judges were and which courts had which jurisdiction. And so that was quite useful. But we were miserable. And so at the end of that first year, we sold up everything and we went back home. And we said to my parents, this is too hard. We don't think it's for us. And we're quite happy to live off you guys.
Now you return for a second time, right?
Yeah, so we did a year of study, then we went back, and then we came back to try to make a go of it, and we decided it wasn't for us, and we went back, and then we had some quite serious security type issues, violent attacks of other family members. We were quite fortunate it wasn't us, but my parents were getting really, really nervous, and it just didn't seem like Durban was going to be where we would be able to make a go. And so they my parents were quite good about it. And they said, well, why don't you, just try again? Maybe that didn't work for whatever reason. Try something new, try somewhere else. And so we came back to Sydney, and everything just fell into place after that. I think they were just right. Maybe we weren't mature enough. Maybe we were just quite spoiled. But we came back and we made another go of it. We still didn't break into private practice straight away. So, I did another year of putting legal conferences together at LexisNexis. And that was useful to me because it taught me about who the different experts were in the different areas of law. So I got to know who were the best practitioners around the country. And I wouldn't have had that exposure without that role. And then not long after that, I did that for a year. And then there was a graduate opportunity that came up at a law firm called Holm Wilkinson Lowry, which is now HWLE. And I applied and I interviewed, and for whatever reason, I was successful. And that was the beginning of my private practice career.
I wanted to ask, when you went back to South Africa, did you work there as well,
No.
or did you just stay with your parents at that stage?
No, we were just at home. It was quite difficult to kind of break in. I mean, my mom at that stage had her own law firm, so we kind of hung out there. But it wasn't a kind of law I wanted to do, and so it was just mostly bumming around, really.
So did your sister also then get employment at the same time?
Yeah, so not long after she did slightly different things, but also then ended up in private practice. And so and then not long after that, my brother, who was the youngest of all of us and also a lawyer, came across. And so, we're all practicing as lawyers now. My sister and I are at different firms. My brother set up his own practice. And so, the Seomangals are doing their legal thing in Sydney.
Still in South Africa?
No, my parents moved to Sydney not long after my brother did. And so my nuclear family, we just ended up all being fortunately together in Sydney. And I think that was also kind of when things just seemed to flow for us. Because I think the big kind of gap was that we were always here, just alone, and we didn't have that sense of, like that cocoon that we were used to having.
And how long was that in years then, from the time that you came back again until you felt like
Parents came?
until you felt like, okay, this feels like more home now?
It wasn't straight after. So my parents probably came 2 to 3 years after we came back for the second time. Um, and then we were all kind of trying to settle in, starting our careers, still trying to like break into Sydney. Um, which is not like the most forgiving of cities sometimes. But, and we didn't really have a sense of community around us in terms of a South African community or, South African Indian community even. And so it was just really our family trying to make it work. I think the first time it hit me that Sydney was home was quite amusingly. We'd gone as a family on our first kind of trip as grown-ups to India, because we hadn't gone to India since we were kids. And so we went on this kind of adventure trip through India for about 4 weeks. And if you've been to India before, you'll understand that it can be a place that's quite intense. And by the fourth week, I think we were all just quite worn from the intensity of being in this environment. And we were on our way back to Sydney, and we were on our way to the airport in Mumbai to catch our flight. And I said to my mom, and I said, I'm just so tired. I just want to go home. And my mom asked me, which home? Which home do you want to go to? Is it like Durban home or Sydney home? And that was the first time it hit me that Sydney was home, because I said to her, I was like, no, Sydney home. I just want to go home.
Yeah, I mean, you're right,
fantastic.
and it's a thing, Ben often say that in the podcast that we have. It's like this. There's a period that goes past, and then you go back to maybe your roots somewhere, or you could go home, like you did go to India, and then you come back and you realize, oh my goodness, this is my home now. Because you've
Yeah.
made everything here. You go back to your bed. This is where you live. This is where everything that is familiar to you. And but that takes time, right? It takes some years to get. For some people it's 10 years. For other people it's a little bit shorter. But it's not like a year or two. It's nobody's that for. It takes a while.
No. And even in that sense, I think we were really fortunate because, my nuclear family was all together, right? So like for us, the sense of home was just wherever our family is. And so I think that probably happened for us a little earlier because of that. The first few years I remember were challenging also for us because we kept wanting to go back to Durban because my parents were there. And, that we just felt like we needed to be there with them, and they were getting older, and, they were having health issues. And it just seemed like we were just constantly needing to get on a plane to go back to, South Africa. And so I think that started to shift more for us once they were here. Definitely.
And do your parents work here now, or what do they do?
No, my parents are they're quite old now, and they're quite very well and truly retired and spend their days entertaining their grandchildren.
It's a great pastime. That's for sure. It is. So tell us a little bit about, I mean, you're coming in, we've had a couple of lawyers on the podcast, and of course, often they have to redo things, and it's not difficult. It's difficult to settle in, and whether you're a lawyer, a finance person, or just normal people like me and Ben, you come in and you all have to take a step sideways, backwards, somewhere along the line, because South Africans are very, we kind of have a lot of self-belief, and we come through difficult times, and as we said in our podcast before, we learn a lot of skills across a very diverse thing before we come here, and then suddenly you're pigeonholed into a particular area and so on. And so how was that for you? I think there's two things in your coming in here. The one thing is finally breaking into a law firm, but also secondly, there, like your mom, there were not many of you here at that time, right?
Yeah, and yes, I think that's right. But I think once I landed a graduate role, I just had to learn to do the same things as everyone else. The difference for me was that when I landed a graduate role, I was 3 years older than my counterparts, right? Because of my migration journey and being able to break in, um, and that for me, I think, because you know maybe I'm ambitious, maybe it's my background, but it was a difficult thing for me to swallow that I am 3 years older than everybody else and we're doing the same things. And so I remember just, and this is pre-GFC, so now you know how old I am. But I remember quite intensely needing to ensure that I get to the level that I should be at an age that was appropriate. And so I worked really hard. And, that first 4 years, basically for me, I went from like graduate to senior associate in 4 years because it was just so important for me to be able to reach the level that I thought, and these were my own standards, nobody else cared, but that the level that I thought I needed to be at the age that I thought was appropriate. And the other thing I think for me was that I was fortunate, very fortunate in the opportunities that I was afforded. The people who took chances on me when I was, a total variable, right? And that in terms of my firm that gave me the graduate role and the partners that I got to work with, and then even later on as I moved to a more senior role into partnership, here at Thomson Gear, was just the opportunities and the platform that I've been given as part of that to make whatever of it that I will. And in that I recognize that that I've been quite fortunate, and that the position I'm in is one of quite considerable privilege.
So I want to ask you, because our pods obviously, we want to learn about your journey. That's first and foremost, but it's also informative, and it helps other people. That's why Anton and I started it, to help people a little bit coming over. And you spoke about mentorship and having a good mentor. So that's probably something I've learned from a lot of people, that probably some people do better than others. But talk us through that mentorship and how you did it and what that meant for you.
Sure. No, absolutely. Like, mentors, largely for me, informal mentors. So it wasn't like formal programs or anything like that I was a part of. But it was, for example, my partner, my supervising partner from the time I was a graduate, and, we worked together for 11 and a half years. And he's like a dad to me in terms of the way he's provided me with guidance and support, both professionally and personally. But just the interest he took in me as a rank outsider to show me what a career like mine could look like. So people like him who genuinely took an interest in me. As I became more senior and as I was approaching partnership, there were people that unlikely mentors that presented themselves. One of them was like my arch nemesis, who at one time we had the most fraught of relationships because I just, for all intents, was a South African princess and therefore assumed certain standards. And, here he is coming from this pure, Australian background with the way things are meant to operate from his perspective. And it was very difficult for us to meet in the middle. In hindsight, when I look back at that, I think I was quite young and I was quite immature. And later on, as I became more senior, and he reached out to me as he was retiring, this lovely man who was the chairman of partners at the firm, Bob Gardini, and he became one of my mentors to partnership. He provided me with like formal, at that stage, it became from informal to formal mentoring, because it was important for him to provide me with that support to my partnership journey. Just similarly, I've had a number of mentors outside of the law. One of them was the chair of of the Australian India Business Council when I was the vice chair for 4 years. Wonderful man, Jim Varghese. And to this day, like, there are things when I feel like I need to sound off on him, and I'll give him a call, and he'll give me such sage advice. And one of the best bits of advice I got from him when I was having a really difficult time, because it was the first time I'd done anything that was outside of, professional, but with profile, which was at the Australian India Business Council. It was quite a difficult role for me navigating, because I was quite young compared to other people in that position. And I had so many challenges. And I said to him at one stage, this is so hard. I don't know if I want to do this. And he said to me, and I think about this advice almost every other day, because he said to me, this is not the hardest thing you're ever going to deal with. But what this is doing is giving you the tools to help you to deal with the harder things that are yet to come. And he's so right. Every other day I think of him, because he's, they hold so true. Those tools are invaluable.
And then, of course, the question goes, who do you mentor?
Lots and lots and lots of people. I've been in both formal and informal mentoring as a mentor for a long, long time. I feel, I had a meeting with two of my newest mentors who are Sydney University law students earlier this week. I do a lot through the Diverse Women in Law organization, and my firm is a platinum partner of theirs, and we do a lot of support for diverse women in the early stage of their legal professions. The Macquarie University program, I've been mentoring through them for a long, long time. It's there are not many people like me in a position like mine. And so it's a responsibility and a privilege for me. And it's one that I feel quite keenly. And I think it's quite important for me to therefore make myself available to people who are coming up, because it's not often that they will have an opportunity to speak to somebody like me in a position like mine.
So what would be the most common advice that you give these young people coming over? Doesn't matter where from, might be India, might be South Africa, might be all over. What would be like the most common things you share with them and help them with?
So I think that the one thing I say to all the university students is don't be in a rush. It's like, spend as much time as you can at university. Those are the best days of your life. But aside from that, I think one of the things I think that is quite common across any of my mentees, in terms of the advice that I share, is about being true to yourself and about feeling confident in who you are, because your difference is your superpower, right? And I think that what had happened for the longest of time was that young people who had some kind of difference, who were diverse in some way, felt like they needed to be more mainstream in order to be successful, in order to get ahead. So as part of that, a lot of people felt like they needed to lose bits of who they were and embrace something that was not necessarily true to who they were. And I think that shift has well and truly come. And I think one of the things that I share across, any of those channels for me is about, bringing your whole self. Your lived experience is of value in whatever environment that you are in. And it's actually, through what your lived experience that we can see your resilience, your courage, your problem solving, your honesty, your integrity. It's that authentic side of you that I think is what is more valuable, and you should value yourself.
Yeah, it
That's
is.
good
It
advice. Yep.
is. Let's just talk a little bit about. I think you do work for. Well, you're a speaker sometimes at Southern Crossings, where you talk to women in leadership. What is your role there?
So we at Southern Crossings there is a leadership lunch for senior women, and it's kind of started I think last year, and it's like a small cohort of women, and we discuss our experiences, and we share our experiences around the table, and it's the same group of women at every lunch, so that we can learn from each other, and it's just an incredible source of nourishment, soul nourishment, to listen to like-minded women in strong leadership positions, but with our wonderful South African accents.
Yeah. No, it's been a really wonderful discussion. I think that the thing that stands out for me, if I think back at the stuff that you say, you could easily have been, as you say, the South African princess, coming here and think things will fall in place, and so you try and you try again, and then I think what you then do is you realize, well, there's some work I need to do. I need to focus on, these are the things that I really want. You go and after you get them, and then some things happen to you. Like, for instance, you get a fantastic mentor, and then you realize, well, okay, this is how the world works. And so from there onwards, you get yourself involved in all sorts of things. And because of who you are and how you grew up in terms of, the Australia, India youth group, and then those dialogues that you do. But then I think the other thing that stands out for me, Sanushka, is the fact that you say, well, I've had I know I'm privileged to have been here in the first place, right? It doesn't go past you. And then you say, well, what do I do and what can I do? And you term it almost as not almost, you say it's a responsibility I have to impart that.
It is though.
That's wonderful, that's really wonderful.
Thank you. Look, I genuinely feel that way, because and this I think was part of our immersive learning growing up, but through some stroke of fate or luck or whatever it is, I was born into my family in South Africa, and ended up here, and I could have been, if my great-grandparents hadn't made the decision to move to South Africa, I could have been, there. In India, I don't know, on some rice field. I may not have been educated. I may not have had any of the privileges that I have. So I feel my privilege very keenly, because I know that, I'm lucky to be on the path that I am.
Yeah. And we've spoken to a lot of people on the pod, but just in life in general as well, that you speak to very successful people, and they all allude to the fact that there's somewhere you need a break or you need a bit of luck and that kind of thing. But I think it mustn't go unsaid as well that luck alone can't do it. You need a bit of luck, you need a break or two, but also you need to put in the work, and you need to then use the opportunities that are given to you. Just getting the opportunity in itself is not going to make it work. You also need to work at it. And I think you shouldn't undersell yourself at that. You worked extremely hard to make it work. Yes, you've got opportunities. You were lucky every now and again, but you've put the work, the hard yards in, and that's important as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's very kind.
On that note, that's thank you, Ben. Sanushka, it's been wonderful talking to you. It's something long coming, and I'm really happy to have had you on the podcast, Ben and I, and to hear some of the important things in your life, and And congratulations to you, for reaching where you have and for the things that you do. But most of all, the respect that I have for you for your focus on giving back as opposed to the stuff that you've received. And that's wonderful.
No, thank you. Thank you. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. It feels a little bit like home.